If your mind won't slow down, if worry follows you into the night and steals your peace, you're not alone, and you're not broken. Anxiety has a way of making you feel trapped, like you're carrying everything by yourself. But what if God never asked you to carry it alone? What if there's a simple, powerful way to stop the spiral, breathe again, and experience real peace right in the middle of your stress? Stay with me. This could change how you face anxiety forever. Let me start with something that might surprise you. Every single year, more than 300 million people around the world struggle with anxiety. That's not a small group. That's roughly 1 out of every 25 people. Which means if you're sitting in a room with 100 people, chances are at least 4 of them are quietly fighting anxious thoughts right now. And if I'm being honest, I've been one of them. I know what it feels like when your mind won't shut off. When the day ends but your thoughts don't. When you replay conversations, imagine worst-case scenarios, and lie awake wondering how everything is going to turn out. Anxiety doesn't always show up as panic attacks. Sometimes it shows up as constant worrying, overthinking, tight shoulders, shallow breathing, and a sense that you're always on edge. But here's something that stopped me in my tracks the first time I really thought about it. Over 2,000 years ago, the Apostle Paul wrote 4 words that sound almost impossible in today's world. Be anxious for nothing. At first, that phrase can feel dismissive, almost unrealistic. Like, Paul, you don't understand my bills, my kids, my health, my future. But here's the part most people overlook. Paul didn't write those words from a peaceful vacation spot or a quiet prayer room. He wrote them while chained to a Roman guard, facing the real possibility of execution. No freedom, no control, no certainty about tomorrow. And yet he says, be anxious for nothing. That's when it hit me. This wasn't motivational talk. This wasn't denial. This was a strategy, one that had already been tested in the worst conditions imaginable. So what did Paul know that we desperately need to learn? Hidden inside Philippians chapter 4 verse 6 is what I like to call a 3-step antidote for anxiety. Not theory, not hype. A real lived-out way to deal with worry when it shows up uninvited. And it starts with step 1, stop the spiral. Paul doesn't say, pretend your problems don't exist. He doesn't say, ignore reality. He says, be anxious for nothing. In other words, refuse anxiety as your default reaction. That's hard because anxiety feels productive. It feels like you're doing something. But here's the uncomfortable truth I had to face in my own life. Worry is completely useless. Jesus said it clearly in Matthew chapter 6 verse 27. Which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? Think about that. Has worrying ever fixed a problem for you? Has it ever changed an outcome? Saved a relationship? Paid a bill? Prevented a bad day? For me, the answer was no. Anxiety drained my energy, stole my sleep, and made small problems feel massive without solving anything. Worry is like sitting in a rocking chair. You're moving non-stop, but you're not actually going anywhere. And here's what makes it even more dangerous. Worry doesn't just waste your time. It quietly erodes your faith. Every moment I spent spiraling was a moment I wasn't trusting God. It's like having a wealthy, loving father and still panicking over lunch money. King David understood this tension deeply. In Psalm chapter 94, verse 19, he says, "When anxiety was great within me, your consolation brought me joy." Notice something important. David didn't deny his anxiety. He acknowledged it. But he didn't let it take the steering wheel. That image changed everything for me. Anxiety doesn't have to disappear before peace shows up. It just has to stop driving. You can feel the worry and still choose to put God's truth in the driver's seat. Stopping the spiral doesn't mean you'll never feel anxious again. It means you refuse to let anxiety decide your next move. You pause. You recognize the pattern. You say, "This worry isn't helping me and it's not leading me closer to God." And that decision right there, that's powerful. Because once you stop the spiral, you're finally ready for the second step, the one that changes everything. Not by holding tighter, but by letting go. Not by carrying more, but by making a trade. Once you've stopped the spiral, once you've caught yourself before anxiety runs off with your thoughts, the next question becomes unavoidable. What do I do with this worry now? Because if you don't intentionally place it somewhere else, it always finds its way back onto your shoulders. That's where Paul's second step comes in, and this one changed my prayer life completely. Paul says, "But in everything by prayer and supplication." In other words, make the trade with Jesus. Let your requests be made known to God. This isn't just talking out loud. This isn't spiritual venting. This is a transfer of ownership. I used to pray like this. God, I'm stressed. God, I'm overwhelmed. God, I'm worried. And then I'd walk away still holding the same weight. Nothing actually changed. I talked about my anxiety, but I never handed it over. Paul is inviting us to do something much deeper. When you bring your worries to God, you're not informing him he already knows. You're choosing to place what you can't control into the hands of someone who can. Think about it like this. Anxiety is exhausting because it forces you to act like everything depends on you. Prayer reminds you that it doesn't. One of the clearest pictures of this is found in Matthew chapter 14, when Peter steps out of the boat and walks on water. As long as his eyes are locked on Jesus, he does the impossible. Waves don't matter. Wind doesn't matter. Logic doesn't matter. But the moment Peter shifts his focus when he notices the storm, fear floods in and he begins to sink. That story isn't just about miracles. It's about attention. Worry works the same way. The moment your focus moves from Jesus to the storm, anxiety takes over. And what makes it worse is that Jesus hasn't moved. He's still right there, just like he was for Peter. Peter later writes something incredibly practical in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. That word cast doesn't mean gently set down. It means to throw forcefully, intentionally, without hesitation. I had to learn this the hard way. There were nights when my mind would race at 2 or 3 in the morning. I'd replay every possible outcome, every mistake, every what if. And one night, exhausted, I finally said out loud, God, I can't carry this anymore. Not politely, not calmly. Honestly, that was the first time I understood what casting really meant. You're not throwing your anxiety into the void. You're throwing it towards someone who specializes in impossible situations. The same Jesus who caught Peter on the water is the one catching your worries right now. And don't miss this, Jesus isn't annoyed by your anxiety. He's not disappointed that you're struggling. He cares. Look at Mark chapter 4, verse 38. Jesus is asleep in a boat during a violent storm. Waves are crashing. The disciples are panicking. And Jesus is at peace. That same calm, the kind that sleeps through chaos, is available to you. When you cast your cares on him, you're not just getting rid of anxiety. You're exchanging your human limits for divine peace. You're saying, God, this is too heavy for me, but it's not too heavy for you. And that exchange is where peace begins, not when the storm stops, but when control changes hands. But here's the mistake many people make. They cast their anxiety once, then pick it back up 5 minutes later. They pray, then immediately start worrying again. Making the trade with Jesus means trusting that once it's in his hands, it no longer belongs to you. That doesn't mean you won't feel tempted to worry again. It means you remind yourself, I've already handed this over. And when the thought returns, you throw it back again and again if you have to. Which leads directly into the third step, one that most people skip, but Paul treats as essential. It's the step that locks peace into place. The step that shifts your mindset from fear to faith. This is the step almost everyone skips. And honestly, I used to skip it too. Paul says, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. That last part isn't optional. It's not spiritual decoration. It's strategic. Most of us pray when we're anxious. We ask God for help. We ask him to fix the situation, change the outcome, calm our emotions. But then we stop there. We leave thanksgiving out, especially when things still look bad. Paul knew something we often forget. Gratitude shifts your mind before circumstances change. I didn't always believe that. When I was overwhelmed, the idea of thanking God felt fake. Why would I give thanks when nothing had improved yet? But that's exactly why thanksgiving matters. It's not about denying reality. It's about declaring trust in the middle of it. Gratitude doesn't pretend the problem isn't real. It reminds you that God is. There's actually a reason thanksgiving is so powerful. When you thank God while you're still waiting, you're reminding yourself of his track record. You're saying you've come through before, and I trust you to do it again. Paul isn't being polite here. He's being intentional. Gratitude literally interrupts anxiety. It pulls your mind out of the future and anchors it in truth. Think of it like checking your bank account before panicking over a purchase. You don't guess, you look at what's already there. Thanksgiving does the same thing spiritually. It reminds you of the faithfulness you've already experienced. One of the clearest examples of this is found in Matthew chapter 14 when Jesus feeds the 5,000. The Bible says he took 5 loaves and 2 fish, looked up to heaven and gave thanks. Picture that moment. thousands of hungry people, an impossible situation, and a meal that wouldn't feed a little league team. Any logical response would be stress or urgency. But Jesus gives thanks before the miracle happens. That wasn't denial, that was confidence. Jesus wasn't thanking God because the problem was solved. He was thanking God because he trusted his Father completely. Thanksgiving came first, then the provision followed. That flipped something in my own life. I realized that when I wait to be thankful after things improve, anxiety stays in control. But when I thank God before I see the answer, faith takes the lead. Thanksgiving changes the atmosphere of your mind. Anxiety says, "What if this goes wrong?" Gratitude says, "God has already proven himself." Anxiety focuses on what's missing. Gratitude focuses on who's present. And that shift is everything. Paul lived this out firsthand. Remember, he wrote these words from prison. No guarantees, no timeline, no visible breakthrough. And yet he practiced gratitude anyway. Not because life was easy, but because God was faithful. This reminds me of the story of Martha and Mary in Luke chapter 10. Martha was busy, stressed, and overwhelmed, doing good things but worried about many things. Mary chose to sit at Jesus' feet. Jesus didn't criticize Martha for working. He corrected her for worrying while she worked. That distinction matters. You can be productive without being anxious. You can plan without panicking. You can care deeply without carrying burdens that were never meant to be yours. God isn't asking you to become emotionless. He's inviting you to become anchored. And this is where Thanksgiving seals the process. When you stop the spiral, make the trade with Jesus, and then choose gratitude, peace begins to settle, not because everything is fixed, but because trust has replaced fear. I've had moments where nothing changed externally, but everything changed internally. The pressure eased. The racing thoughts slowed. The weight lifted. Not because the problem disappeared, but because I remembered who was holding it. Every sleepless night you've endured. Every anxious thought that hijacked your peace. Every worst-case scenario looping in your mind, God sees it all. And he's not waiting for you to get everything together before helping you. He's offering you peace now. But peace isn't passive, it's practiced. That's why Paul doesn't just say, "Don't worry." He gives us a pattern, a rhythm, a way to respond when anxiety shows up uninvited. And in the next part, we're going to pull all 3 steps together, how to live this out daily, especially in those quiet moments when anxiety tries to creep back in. Because your anxiety doesn't get the final word, God does. Here's something we need to be honest about: anxiety doesn't disappear forever after one good prayer. If it did, none of us would ever struggle again. Anxiety has a way of coming back, especially in quiet moments late at night, or right when you think you're finally at peace. That doesn't mean the process isn't working. It means you're human. Paul never promised a life without anxious thoughts. What he gave us was a way to respond when they show up. And this is where everything we've talked about becomes practical, daily, repeatable, and real. Let's bring the 3 steps together. First, stop the spiral. That moment when a thought pops into your mind: what if this goes wrong? What if I fail? What if I lose everything? That's your cue. You don't argue with the thought. You don't analyze it to death. You simply recognize it and say, "This is anxiety, and I'm not letting it take control." I've had to do this countless times. Sometimes in the middle of a workday, sometimes while driving, sometimes lying in bed staring at the ceiling. The key is catching the thought early before it snowballs. Second, make the trade with Jesus. This isn't a one-time event. It's a habit. When the worry resurfaces, you bring it back to God again. You pray, "God, I'm handing this back to you. I've already cast this on you, and I'm choosing to trust you again." Trust is rarely a single decision. It's a repeated choice. And third, activate thanksgiving. This is where peace begins to settle in. You thank God not because everything feels good, but because He is good. You thank Him for past faithfulness, present strength, and future hope, even when the future feels uncertain. That's the rhythm, over and over again. Paul follows Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 with a promise in verse 7. "And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." Notice what peace does. It guards. That means anxiety may try to return, but peace stands watch. This kind of peace doesn't always make sense. It doesn't require perfect circumstances. It shows up even when nothing around you has changed yet. I've experienced that kind of peace. The situation stayed hard, but my heart didn't stay frantic. My thoughts didn't stay chaotic. There was a calm I couldn't explain, and I knew it wasn't coming from me. That's the peace of God. Paul doesn't stop there. In Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, he gives us another practical instruction. Whatever things are true, noble, just pure, lovely, and of good report, think on these things. Anxiety feeds on repetition, so does peace. What you allow your mind to dwell on shapes your emotional life. If you replay worst-case scenarios all day, anxiety will grow. But if you intentionally redirect your thoughts toward truth, toward what God says instead of what fear says, peace strengthens. This doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means choosing which voice gets the loudest volume. David practiced this often. He would talk to his own soul. He'd say things like, "Why are you cast down, O my soul? Hope in God." He didn't wait for his feelings to change. He spoke truth into them. That's something we all need to learn. You don't have to obey every thought that enters your mind. You can question it. You can replace it. You can say that thought isn't from God and I don't have to entertain it. Anxiety wants you to believe you're alone, unprotected, and on your own. God's peace reminds you that you're held, seen, and cared for. And when anxiety shows up at 3 in the morning, when your mind starts racing and sleep feels impossible, that's not a sign of failure. That's simply another opportunity to practice the pattern. Stop the spiral, make the trade, activate Thanksgiving, again and again and again. Over time, something changes. The anxious episodes lose their power. The spirals shorten. Peace shows up faster. Not because you became stronger, but because you learned to rely on God more consistently. This is how faith becomes lived experience, not just a belief on paper. In the final part, we're going to talk about choice, the moment where you decide what kind of life you want to live moving forward. Not a life without problems, but a life anchored in God's peace no matter what comes. That choice is closer than you think. Now we come to the moment that really matters, the choice. Anxiety isn't just something that happens to us. At some point, it becomes something we respond to. And that response determines whether worry keeps ruling our inner world or whether peace finally takes its place. Paul gives us clarity here. He doesn't say, try not to be anxious. He says, be anxious for nothing. That's not a suggestion, it's an invitation into a different way of living. You have a choice right now. You can keep carrying burdens that were never meant for your shoulders. Or you can do what Paul did in that Roman prison, choose trust over fear, even when circumstances don't cooperate. This doesn't mean you stop caring, it means you stop carrying. Think again about Martha and Mary in Luke chapter 10. Martha was busy, responsible, and committed. She wasn't lazy, she was overwhelmed. Jesus didn't rebuke her for serving, he corrected her for worrying while she served. That distinction matters. You can be responsible without being restless. You can plan without panicking. You can work hard without living under constant pressure. God isn't asking you to be superhuman. He's offering to be supernatural for you. Every sleepless night you've endured, every racing thought that stole your focus, every worst-case scenario that played on repeat in your mind, God sees it. And He's not standing back waiting for you to figure it out on your own. He's ready to trade your anxiety for His peace right now in this very moment. Peace doesn't come from controlling outcomes. It comes from trusting the one who already holds them. That's why Paul's 3-step pattern is so powerful. It gives you something to do when anxiety shows up, especially in those moments when your emotions feel stronger than your faith. Stop the spiral. Refuse to let anxiety be your default response. Make the trade with Jesus. Hand Him what you were never designed to carry alone. And unlock peace through thanksgiving. Remind your soul of who God is and what He's already done. This isn't about perfection. It's about practice. There will be days you do this well. There will be days you forget and have to start again. God isn't grading your performance. He's inviting your trust. And here's the truth that changed everything for me. Peace isn't the absence of problems. It's the presence of God in the middle of them. When anxiety whispers, what if everything falls apart? Peace answers, God is still faithful. When fear says you're alone, peace says He cares for you. When worry says you can't handle this, peace says you don't have to. 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 7 says it simply, cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. Not some of it, not the manageable parts, all of it. And every time anxiety tries to come back, you cast it again. Over time, something shifts. The storms don't always stop, but they stop controlling you. Your thoughts become steadier. Your heart becomes calmer. Your faith becomes stronger. Not because life got easier, but because you learned where to place the weight. So tonight, when your mind starts racing, when your chest feels tight, when worry tries to pull you into another spiral, remember Paul's words. Remember the pattern. Remember that peace is available to you right now. Your anxiety doesn't get the final word. God does. And if this message spoke to your heart, take a moment to like this video, subscribe for more life-changing biblical truth, and share it with someone who might be carrying more than they should. Because no one was meant to fight anxiety alone. If there's one thing to remember, it's this: you were never meant to carry anxiety alone. Peace doesn't come from having everything figured out. It comes from placing what you can't control into God's hands again and again. No matter how loud worry gets, God's peace is stronger, steadier, and always available. If this message encouraged you, feel free to like the video and subscribe so we can keep growing together. And if someone you love is struggling, share this with them. You might be part of their breakthrough.